Both the S1 II and the S1R II share identical bodies at very similar price points, but internally they are very different. I have tested them side by side for image quality, AF, slow motion, dynamic range and more, so we can find out which Lumix camera is the true king of video. Straight in with a shot of me in front of the camera on a cloudy day. The first thing that jumps out to me here is skin tones. There is more colour and saturation in my skin on the S1R II. Almost looks like there is more sun hitting my face, but it was a totally overcast, cloudy day. The S1 II on the other hand has a much more neutral, flatter look. It is definitely down to personal preference here, but for me, I much prefer the look of the S1 II in this scenario. I just like the way it handles the luminance and looks a little bit softer and rolls off the highlights better on my face. So here is a test under controlled lighting. Both images look pretty amazing, but again, the first thing that jumps out is the difference in skin tones. The S1 II appears again more neutral, where we have the S1R II that brings those really rich skin tones with almost a bit more contrast. I do not think there is a winner here between these two images. They both look really good and impress me, and I just think it comes down to which one you personally prefer. Here's a shot where I wanted to compare the detail between the two different sensors. The S1 II almost pushes the greens into a yellowy orange area, and the S1R II shows again more richer greens which are a little bit more denser and I would say more lifelike and accurate. Now, when we punch in 500% here, that 8K sensor from the S1R II really starts to show its detail. Do not get me wrong here, the 6K image from the S1 II has loads of information, but it is definitely softer when compared to the 8K image from the S1R II. One of the trickiest colours for digital sensors to reproduce has always been red. And something interesting I noticed when capturing these side-by-side tests is just how differently each of these sensors go about it. So I went and grabbed as many red objects around my workshop as I could find. To me here, the S1R II just does an overall better job straight out of camera. They're richer, denser, and I think the image just is slightly more appealing. And when we punch in on the strawberries, you can really see the difference. The S1R II just looks more fuller and rich right out of camera. Onto low light, starting off on ISO 2500. Both of these cameras to me look identical here. They're both super clean, super usable, which is great to see. Going up to ISO 5000, and again, they're both super clean, both super usable, and not a lot to separate them. At ISO 10,000 now, and we do start to see some visible noise creep into both images. Take a look at the sky and the bushes around the edge. It is there on both of these cameras. It's very close once again, but I would say ever so slightly cleaner on the S1 II, but once it gets uploaded to YouTube and encoded, it probably looks just the same. 25,000 ISO now, and finally we see some separation between the two images. It is definitely cleaner now on the S1 II. Both of these images would need a decent amount of noise reduction, but we are definitely looking cleaner here on the S1 II. Finally, 51,200 ISO, the max ISO for both cameras. Actually really impressive here. They are covered in noise, but I had to go outside and step the lens down to like f11 to get exposure with an ISO value this high. So the fact that we've even got maybe usable images once you've done some noise reduction is impressive from both cameras. That being said, the S1 II is much cleaner here. I'm not sure how this is going to look after it's been encoded up to YouTube, but here in the editing software, it is an easy win for the S1 II. Okay, so let's get into slow motion, and bear with me here, this can be a bit of a complicated one. Both of these cameras claim to shoot 4K 120 frames per second full frame, which sounds amazing. But there's a new industry standard, I don't know who makes these standards, that claims as long as you are not cropping in more than 1.3 times on the sensor, you can still call it full frame. So this means that the S1 II has a crop of 1.24 times and the S1R II has a crop of 1.1 times. So on paper, you'd expect the S1R II with its higher resolution 8K sensor and the lower crop at 1.1 times to have a much more detailed 4K 120 frames. But in reality, when you place the shots side by side, they are almost identical. And this is probably down to how both cameras go about oversampling. So there's really not much in terms of image quality to separate these two in 4K 120 frames per second, but there are a few quirks what are worth noting. The first one is that the S1 II does not allow you to slow down the footage in camera, meaning that when you capture your 120 frames, the only way you can play it back in slow motion is in editing later, where the S1R II does allow you to slow down in camera, allowing you to preview that 120 frames in slow motion to know if you've got the shot nailed or not. And another big point is the S1 II is one of the first mirrorless cameras to allow us to shoot slow motion open gate on a full frame sensor. The S1R II only allows you to go up to 60 frames per second when in one of the 16:9 modes. So yeah, it is a bit of a mixed bag. Both have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to slow motion. In terms of 4K 120 frames per second, I would say it's a draw. But what really edges it for me is that slow motion open gate that you get in the S1 II. If you think that you would use this mode, it is extremely valuable. While we are touching on the more complex stuff, let's quickly go over autofocus. But honestly, this could be a whole video by itself. For the sake of time, let me just tell you my findings from using these cameras over the past couple of months. The S1 II is definitely more well behaved. It does what you expect it to do and want it to do more often than not. Whereas the S1R II works fine around 70 to 80% of the time, but sometimes it just acts a little bit strange and weird. It just does something you've not told it to do or hunts unexpectedly. That being said though, in a controlled side-by-side test here in my workshop, it does appear that the S1R II is doing a better job of locking onto the eye of the dummy head on a motorized slider than the S1 II. But I would say in real world use, I found the S1 II to be a little bit better. But the main point I want to get across here is that I am extremely confident that Lumix will bring out new firmware updates for both cameras that's going to make the AF rock solid. Right, let's get into in-body image stabilization. For the first test, I put IBIS on both camera systems and just did the same walk down the same place. I can't separate these two images. I think it is pretty even. Next, I tested cropless IBIS, which is the new fantastic IBIS mode that has come on the new second generation of S1 cameras. Again, to me, this looks pretty even. Maybe the S1 II looks a little bit more floaty, but that could just be down to the way I walked on that one take. And finally, this is maxed out stabilization on both cameras. To no surprise, again, it is pretty even. If I had to pick one, maybe I would just lean to the S1 II. I think the steps look a little bit more smoother, but that could just be down to the differences in the way I walked on each take. All right, let's get on to my least favorite camera test, which is rolling shutter. Starting off with 4K 25 frames per second on both cameras. And to no surprise, we have a clear win here for the S1 II and its partially stacked sensor. It's also worth noting that I have reduced down the motion blur by changing the shutter speed here. This helps us see the results better, as when you pause the frames, they're just not as blurry. So if you was to use the 180-degree shutter rule, you would see more blur, which would hide the rolling shutter more. Up to 5.9K, which is the max resolution for the S1 II. I matched that on the S1R II, and the gap here has definitely got wider. Again, the S1 II doing a really good job. It feels really close to its 4K, which is great to see. Where on the S1R II, it feels like we've taken a bigger jump and got quite a lot worse. I then turned on the notorious dynamic range boost / expansion mode, depending on which camera you're referring to. This is where you turn on a mode to add more dynamic range at the cost of more rolling shutter. And yes, both of these look pretty awful. For me personally, this is where I start to worry about rolling shutter artifacts appearing in my footage. I would not turn on any of these boost modes unless I was really confident the rolling shutter was not an issue of the shot. I've actually done quite a lot of battery life testing for both of these cameras now over the past couple of months, but I just wanted to test them side by side to make 100% sure. So I set both cameras up into their camera picks everything automatic modes, and then I pointed them at my iPad playing some Hot Fuzz and just pressed record. Both cameras was filming in 4K 25 frames per second. The S1R II recorded for 1 hour and 45 minutes, while the S1 II did an extremely impressive 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's the longest I've had out of a battery test out of the S1 II so far, and it's easily the longest I have got out of a full frame camera capturing 4K in any of my battery tests. Most people watching this video probably already know that both of these cameras have identical body designs, but internally things can get very different. The S1R II has a full frame 8K sensor, while the S1 II has a partially stacked 6K sensor, meaning the S1R II has more resolution, but the S1 II with its partially stacked sensor can read information off it much faster. A quick note for anyone who is new to the channel. This channel is all about capturing video, as I do that professionally and I like to stay in my lane. I do take photos as a hobby, and I do think the S1R II is a better photo camera, but my opinion on photos is about as useful as an inflatable dartboard. One of the biggest differences when it comes to capturing video on these cameras though is overheating. I won't dive deep into the results of every single test here, as the fact that there is multiple resolutions and multiple fan modes means that there is hundreds of different scenarios and outcomes. After a lot of testing, it is as simple as the S1 II with its 6K sensor is overall a much more reliable camera when it comes to overheating. The S1R II, when capturing that 8K full resolution mode, can get hot really quickly. You're going to want to run your fan on max, which makes it audible and you can hear the fan, and even then you're not 100% safe depending on outside environments from overheating. Where you are safe on both of these cameras though is in 4K resolution, and I think when you actually start to consider longer takes in the real world and consider storage space, we are realistically going to be capturing most of our 1 hour plus takes in the 4K modes. Both of these cameras do support internal ProRes RAW, which is amazing to see in a mirrorless camera. Important to note though that it is at a max of 5.9K resolution, and because it is a RAW codec, this is going to crop in on the sensor. So with the 8K sensor inside the S1R II, it's going to be a much bigger crop down to 5.9K than it is from a 6K sensor inside the S1 II down to 5.9K. The S1R II pretty much does full sensor readout internal ProRes RAW. While these cameras do look identical on the outside and have confusingly close price points, where they do start to differ is in the images they produce. The S1 II, in my opinion, gives you this softer with more dynamic range image, meaning that the highlights don't clip as easily as on the S1R II, which is a massive advantage in the world of video. On the other hand though, the S1R II is all about punch. It's extremely detailed with amazing color reproduction. It comes out of camera looking really appealing and nice on the eye, and the images are extremely detailed. For hybrid content creators who work for brands and businesses and create content for influencers, you make tons of content for social media and do a bit of long form and the occasional photos, the S1R II is pretty much your dream camera. The S1 II though feels much more of a video workhorse. If you are someone who does longer interviews on a much more regular basis, you film documentaries, music videos, you are just out there telling stories really often, then this might be the camera for you. And I'm not saying that the S1 II can't take amazing photos, it definitely can. And I'm not saying that the S1R II can't do amazing videos, because we have just seen it definitely can. But with its really good cooling system, its faster readout sensor, slow motion open gate modes, and that nearly full frame internal RAW capture, the S1 II reminds me of a more modern, feature-packed FX3 from Sony, but with an EVF. And if you want to see the S1 II go up against the Sony FX3, watch this video here.